Today on the E31 S85 project, we are going to be focusing on paint for at least the next foreseeable few videos. We're going to be breaking it up into multiple parts. Why are we doing this? Well, because it's simple. I need to get this done and also work on customer projects concurrently. What I can do over the winter is engine stuff and mechanical stuff and interior stuff. What I can't do over the winter is paint, and I want to get the paint out of the way now, even if it means painting all the parts, buffing the car, and then storing the parts later for final assembly. But for now, I think I want to paint. I want to get this out of the way, everything except the engine bay. We are going to be doing a color change, so it's going to be really exciting for me to reveal the color of what this E31 is going to be. I've got a clue for you. It is not a color that you commonly see on an E31. In fact, if you try to Google this color, you really won't find much about it, but it is a color that most people know about and have heard about from the 90s, which is kind of cool. So let's dig into getting all the parts out that are going to be painted same body color and lay them all out and talk about it before we start working on prep. Okay, so we really do need to do some work to the chassis here. As you can see, I removed most of the body panels and parts from this car. That kind of prepped it for paint. I did a little bit of body work over in the past and kind of smoothed a few things out here. I want to get a new piece of plastic to cover everything that's not going to end up getting painted on. And obviously, when we do the final paint and primer and all that, we're going to be taping everything up nice and going to be getting as much of whatever is black painted to the new color so that we can really adhere to the properties of a proper color change. All of the parts are basically laid out here. Yes, there are a lot of parts to be painted the body color, including, and I'll go through each one, the hood, the trunk, the front valence. This is genuine CSI ABS, never used. I bought this like a long time ago. Same thing with the rear down there. Rear bumper, front hood cowling, both fenders, radiator core support, headlight covers, sunroof, side skirts, E36 M3 mirrors with a custom aluminum cast base, gas cover, hood hinges, and of course the doors. I got both doors here that need to be hung prior to painting. So a lot needs to happen here, a lot of prep. The good thing about this is that there's no rust, and not to mention, there's no dents, there's no scuffs, no big deep scratches that need a lot of body work. As you can see, I did some of the body work already on the chassis side, so a lot of that is already done. This chassis was in really, really good shape, so I feel pretty confident that all I need to do is just clean this up, scuff it all the way down with 600 grit before laying my coat of primer on. We're going to be using a gray primer on the entire car, both sides, front, back, since we're changing the color. No more black, guys, sorry, no more black. We're going to a different color. What color will it be? We'll find out, we'll find out. Now, as you can see, I kind of did a bit of a piss poor job of covering the engine originally, so we do need to take this plastic off. I want to recover the entire car and start taping off with the right plastic and protecting things. I'm actually remove the engine because I wanted to do engine work too, like rod bearings and things like that. But for now, I want to make sure that everything is covered and protected, including the interior. Interior is really good, really relatively rare interior for the States, so I want to try to protect it as much as I can. And obviously the headliner is going to go, all that type of stuff is going to start getting deconstructed now to this next degree so that we can really start to hone in. The one thing I'm not going to remove for this paint job is the rear window here. You see the rear windscreen. The reason is because these are so rare and so expensive. I had a hard enough time finding a replacement for the front because it had windshield scratches in it, wiper scratches. The rear is just as hard to remove and also just as fragile, so I really don't want to do anything to mess it up. But I can certainly and very easily paint inside of this groove to get all the color permeation into, so that it looks like it's been a factory repaint. So having said all that, this is basically all laid out. We got to start working on prep, talk about paint, and start covering the car. All right, so the plastic is basically covered on there. I gotta do a little bit of taping to make sure it doesn't slide off. The engine's covered for now, but it's coming out later on in this episode. We're gonna be taking the engine out, we're gonna be putting it on a stand, and we're gonna be working on that in another couple of episodes as well. We have all of our stuff here basically ready to start getting sanded, and I have right here a smorgasbord of organized sandpaper. I have it all basically set up by grits and nice manila folders. I am primarily going to be wet sanding all these parts with 600 grit. Now, my 600 grit is a little low on quantity. It's actually very good on quantity. It's a, I don't know what that is. It's 600 grit, all right? It's 600 grit. It's sandpaper and it can be wet sanded. So I'm gonna start wet sanding all these parts. I'm gonna be essentially washing them, then sanding them down, and in locations that you can see here, like, you know, where there's like a lot of wear or, you know, rust spots. This isn't rust, but this is just, you know, dirt. Same thing on the underside of the rear, where I'm gonna end up focusing on, you know, putting up some really nice good paint and clear coat. I wanna really make sure that that's sanded well, so I might end up going to a bit of a rougher grit in order to just get that off before I sand it down to 600 and then lay primer. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna start basically just taking care of these things one at a time and sanding them down, cleaning them up, and then storing them in a safe location so I can get ready to do primer. And I'm not gonna do all the primer at once, but I am gonna be spraying primer on every single part before I lay the paint down, front and back, since we're doing a color change. So part of any good paint job is to ensure that the engine is not in the car during the paint job. Now I will be painting the engine bay later because I have a lot more modifications to make in the engine bay, but we're gonna be taking it out as part of this episode because we need to do some work on the engine later on in future episodes later this fall, like rod bearings and oil pan gasket and some other things we need to spruce up and fix up on this thing before we throw it back in there in its final living space. So let's take out this engine. Let's put it on our jack stand. This guy's our engine stand, rather. This is a new unit that I bought from Jegs. Not sponsored by them, I just basically paid cash for it. It was actually the best value for having a engine stand, heavy duty, that has a worm gear. This is like a 63-to-1 worm gear, and allows you to basically move your engine around as you need to. Because I'm doing rod bearings, that was a really useful tool for me, because the last thing you want to do is try to spin your engine and have it like hit that counterbalance weight where it then ends up spinning and then the whole head is now below and you will never be able to get it back above. So having the spin there with the worm gear sets it into whatever place you want as you're spinning. You don't even have to lock it or anything. The worm gear by definition sets it in the place that you have it last set. So it's kind of cool to have that mechanism built into the engine stand. So let's take this guy out in a quick time lapse. Let's lay it out and let's see if we can try to take the transmission off and put the engine on the engine stand. All right, that worked out perfectly. I was able to remove the oil pan, and now I have exposed rod bearings that I'll do another time. Everything is basically ready for me to start taping off this engine bay and start getting the car and these parts ready for primer. All right, now that the filler has kind of hardened up pretty good, now it's time to sand. And I really want to sand in cross pattern here, and that'll help me to establish what the high spots and low spots are. So let's just very lightly start going through and sanding this out, just like that. Once you get through the tough outer casing of the filler, the rest of the filler underneath that is really easy to sand. You can see I'm making more and more dust now. Let's time lapse this.
So I decided to do some wet sanding on these side skirts. As you can see, I got it nice and soapy, right, and kind of dried it off and make sure I got rid of all the dirt. And then I started going to town with the 600 grit, basically just wet sanding it 600 grit by hand. And there's a couple of spots where I decided that it was probably best to do a like a machine type sanding. So I got like a 400 grit disc on a Milwaukee hand battery powered disc sander, which is, man, that's been a lifeblood, man, for everything that I've been doing. So I'm really glad that I was able to acquire that and use it. It's very, very versatile. I didn't really concentrate too much on the bottoms of the side skirts. I only concentrated more on the locations that you can see, the visible areas. Got rid of any of those gouges. Cleaned it off, felt it and cleaned it off, and gave it another shot. Just kept on going over and over. But yeah, I mean, if there was ever any locations where it needed a little bit more attention, I just kind of gave that attention through the sander. So basically, I'm just sitting there and I'm soapy wet sanding. So at this point, it's basically just like lather, rinse, and repeat. You can see the right side skirt is very hazy. That's because that was the side that was sanded, and that's really what you want. Is after you're done sanding, you want it to be nice and flat looking.
Okay, both side skirts are sanded and ready for primer. As you can tell earlier from the voiceover, I was using 600 grit wet sanded, and I used a soapy water bottle mix that allowed really nice, a lot of good lubrication as they're sanding, so it doesn't kind of bind up on you, and that's really important because you kind of want this to be nice and smooth, and as you're sanding, you kind of want, good, nice, smooth strokes. You don't want it to bind up on you or the paper to fold on you. That's how you get the larger gauge gouges. You can see that I did end up using the Milwaukee hand sander for a couple of areas, namely by the edges here where there were some really large gouges there, and it smoothed all them out, some over here as well. But now this is basically ready for primer. So before we continue to move on with the primer, we need to sand all the rest of the parts. And that will end up happening in the next episode. I'll go through a quick time lapse on doing all that since it will be relatively boring, and then we'll start working on priming all these parts and also, of course, the chassis and getting that ready for primer and paint. Guys, my name is Frank Macaluso from Garageaholic. Thank you so much for watching this E31 S85 build. We're going to be working on this for at least another month until we get this thing painted. We got 4 or maybe 5 videos in this 4 or 5 part series that's going to go through how to paint this entire car from scratch, as you can see. Guys, thank you so much for watching. My name is Frank Macaluso, and I am out of here. Till next time, please like, comment, and subscribe. Later.